Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening from wherever you are. We're starting this from the UK, from our London office. My name is Marzia Zafar, and I will be the moderator for this webinar. I'm joined here by my colleague, Pauline Blanc, Manager of Innovation here at the Council. This is our second webinar on this issue. Last week, we were joined by 3 other experts to discuss the state of storage technology. And today's focus is on the enabling policies for energy storage, as well as identifying obstacles. Why are we doing this, if you're wondering? Well, because the World Energy Council is a neutral organization looking to promote a successful energy transition for all. As part of that, we understand that decarbonization, decentralization, and digitalization depends on a robust set of energy storage technologies that can bring not only hourly but also weekly and seasonal storage. So that's why we're doing this. We are a member-based organization with 85 offices around the world. The Council has conducted a series of thought leadership interviews with energy executives from 17 countries to understand the opportunities and obstacles around energy storage. What we learned from the various interviews is that the power sector is narrowly focused on lithium-ion batteries. So the brief that we put out was a call for action to look at all energy storage technologies. The guest experts today took part in those interviews, and they are here today to answer your questions. So let me quickly introduce our experts, and then I'll open the floor to your questions. The way it's going to work is that if you have a question, please use the chat function to write your question. I will read them aloud. If you would like your name announced, please put your name. If not, I will just say anonymous. So let me introduce our experts. Our first guest expert is Andy Campbell, Executive Director of the Energy Institute at Haas at the University of California, Berkeley. The Energy Institute conducts research on business and policy challenges facing the energy sector. Next, we have Chris Rauscher, who is Director of Policy and Storage Market Strategy for Sunrun, a California company with a focus on storage, virtual power plants, and wholesale markets. And our third and final expert is Rodolfo Martinez, who is an electrical engineer working in the power sector for more than 30 years. He has experience in the field of generation, market operation, distribution, and control centers. Again, this webinar, I want to stress that we've scheduled this webinar for you to ask questions, so I don't want to talk too much at you. And before we start, I'd like to get your thoughts on what you believe is the main challenge to enable energy storage at the moment. So we're just running a quick poll for you guys. Is the challenge coming from technology, policy barriers, or cost? So if you take a second and quickly respond to that poll, we'll also put it up live to see how people responded. That would be greatly appreciated. So I'll give you a few more seconds to go ahead and put your response in there. And again, the question is the challenge coming from technology, policy barrier, or cost? What is the main challenge to enabling energy storage, all energy storage technologies? Okay. So we have, based on your responses, 33% is responded by saying that it's the policy that's the barrier. 19% said the cost, 5% said technology maturity, and then 43% said all of the above. So no one really fully went out on a limb. Half, the majority said it's everything. So with that, let me ask one question from each of our experts, and then please send your questions via the chat function so I can ask. Andy, this question is for you. Thinking about what has been happening in California and the US more broadly in regards to energy storage, what are some key takeaways and lessons you learned what are some lessons learned you think would be helpful for policymakers and regulators to think of when developing energy storage policies?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I think a big takeaway and really describes the situation the sector is in globally is that we're very much in a learning mode when it comes to energy storage, and that the type of policy that is put forward is going to determine what's learned in that particular situation. So in California, there's energy storage mandate, and it had required a significant amount of energy storage to be developed on a relatively short time frame, and a lot was learned from this policy. One thing that happened was that primarily lithium-ion batteries were deployed, which did demonstrate that technology is ready to go. It can be deployed on a relatively short time frame, and I think that was not necessarily fully recognized prior to this policy. The policy also led to a number of market barriers being addressed, like grid interconnection procedures. But another feature of this policy, of particularly a short time frame, and it really focused on cost also, is that very little was learned about other technologies. It was really a lithium-ion battery program, which was not how it was described. I don't think that's what policymakers had in mind necessarily, but because there was this real push to get something in the ground quickly, very little was learned about other technologies. And since then, there's really been an increasing recognition in California and elsewhere that in a grid with lots of wind and solar, very high penetrations beyond what we have today, but where we're headed, that we really need storage with additional other characteristics that lithium-ion batteries don't have.
Okay, thank you so much. Chris, the next question for you. Sunrun currently offers its customers residential solar plus energy storage. Can you tell us about what is driving customers to adopt energy storage, and how do you see this market evolving in the next few years? So basically, do you see connected homes being the norm in the future, and the future being, is it the near future or the midterm and long-term future?
Well, thanks. And as you know, Sunrun, we're the US's largest residential solar and storage company. We've got nearly 300,000 customers nationwide. Batteries about 2 years ago. We now have nearly 10,000 customers with batteries. I think at Sunrun, both the company and our customers, we take a resiliency first approach. So every battery that we install provides backup power to the home. And that is probably the strongest selling point for residential customers around the US, whether you're talking about Hawaii or Puerto Rico, California, or Massachusetts. Now, of course, because batteries are still quite expensive and the grid does not go down all that frequently in most places, except for the power shutoffs in California, in Puerto Rico, there's a lot of capacity left in the battery on a day-to-day basis. So we use that capacity and we aggregate it together for what we call grid services programs. So these are programs where we can network our homes together and provide value to the utility. And that looks like different things in different places. In California, it might be proxy demand response. In New England, it might be direct wholesale market participation. And then in other places, we might be responding to an RFP to replace a peaker plant. And providing these grid services to the utility allows us to lower the end costs of that resilience.
We're somewhat losing you, Chris. I don't know if it's on our end.
To answer your question?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think
why don't you move on to the next question?
Okay, so hopefully the communication is not going to break up too much. Sorry about that. Rodolfo, let me ask you a question. Given your global overview of energy storage regulation, are there any specific examples around the world of sound policies to be followed or mistakes to be avoided to enable energy storage?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think in the positive side, I think the mandates in California and also New York are very good policies, because one of the reasons for the high cost of batteries is that we don't have a huge markets yet. And we need to get the market going by introducing more demand. So these mandates are very good ideas, and also are something that are going to be a non-regret decision, because it is clear that in order to integrate more and more renewables, especially solar, we need storage. Solar is going to be a very viable source of power. Not so much wind, but also there are many occasions in which wind will not be available. Therefore, storage is going to be necessary. So mandates are going to be a good idea to get the things going. In the case of Europe, we don't have mandates, but we have some national plans for complying with the environmental policies of the European Union. And in those plans, the governments are introducing batteries and storage to a certain degree. So this is also a good idea. On the possible mistakes or things that are not being so good so far, I would say that there is a tendency to pair solar and storage together as a single product. And this is probably not going to be an interesting thing, because storage is important that we find the right and the optimal size that is more convenient and more and less costly, the optimal size and the optimal location on the grid. If you find the optimal location on the grid, you will get most of the rewards and benefits from storage, because you will have more resiliency, you can share that storage among many different customers. But those policies that tend to focus on behind the meter storage by providing huge incentives in terms of demand charges, things like that, those are eventually, at the end of the day, not going to be good policies, because as far as batteries go, and lithium-ion batteries also, size matters. Very small batteries, like a home battery of maybe 10 kilowatts, is much more costly than a 1 megawatt battery that you can connect to the grid.
Thank you. So I have a question for you, Rodolfo, from Anari from Estonia. The question for you is, how do you see the rise in interconnection of continents as a competitor of energy storage in terms of providing flexibility?
Sure, we will also complement storage with interconnections, especially today. Interconnections based on direct current, high voltage technologies are proving that are very good and very resilient and very convenient. We are to connect the Spanish Peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula to France. We are now planning for more connections, and most of those are HVDCs. And those HVDCs can be controlled. They can provide even inertia emulation. So it's great. But interconnections alone will not be able to do all the work, because there will be moments in which a large area cannot compensate renewables from one place to another. And that happens. That could happen in Europe, for instance, in winter, or when there is very little sun, or in summer where there is no wind. So in that case, you cannot just forgo storage. You need both. You need storage, and also you need more interconnection. But it's important also not to overdo interconnections. It's important to plan the optimal level of interconnection among countries. If you just introduce too much of interconnection, then it's very likely that you will underuse the resource.
Thank you. Andy, this question is for you from Andreas from the UK. Who should trigger the need for storage, TSOs or the legislature? If TSOs say that they can manage without storage, then it is usually not a PU in place. So who should trigger the need for storage, TSOs or legislatures? If TSOs say that they can manage without storage, then it is usually not put into place. Is that what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think at this point in the life of storage, because it is relatively higher cost and the real needs for it are not today's needs, they're kind of more for these future needs in a grid that will have different generation than we have today. I think it's going to tend to be driven much more by policymakers, legislators, and less by the operating companies today. I think the operating companies today are going to be really great position, going to some of Rodolfo's comments, and kind of identifying particular grid needs and sort of where, if the legislature wants storage to happen, I think a grid operator, TSO, for example, is going to be a good position to find a good location for it where the value would be greatest. But it's pretty unlikely, just left to their own, that transmission owners and operators are going to be doing much energy storage, just because it's relatively high cost. It's going to be relatively more risky than traditional investments, and there usually are some traditional investments that can achieve a certain number of those same attributes.
Okay, thank you. I have a question from Marco from Chile. This is for you, Chris. Where are your customers mostly from, and what's their background? And can the same business model that you have in California work in a country like Chile? Oh, okay. Sorry, Chris. I think communication has dropped off. So the other question is from John Gordon from the UK. And I think, Rodolfo, if you can respond to this, does the lack of engineering skill set in developing regions hinder this new industry, and how can it be overcome?
Well, I believe that storage technology is complicated in the making, but using the storage when it's developed is not so difficult. We are, in the case of Spain, in our company, we have just introduced a new battery that is connected to the distribution network. We believe that the distribution network is probably the optimal place to locate batteries. And we are learning together with the vendor, with the company that is providing the software to control the battery, and they are also learning. So by the end of this project, both the utility and the vendor will have very good knowledge of how to control, how to operate, how to improve the software. And I believe that the next generation of batteries that we install next year and 2 years from now, they will be pretty much a plug and play situation that you can control from the control center far away, and they need very little maintenance. So for remote areas in which you don't have the crew to attend a problem, batteries can really provide a good service.
Okay, thank you so much. I want to see if the question from the person from Chile can be, if either yourself, Rodolfo, or Andy can respond to that while we get Chris back online. The question was, where Sunrun's customers, who are they mostly? And can the same business model that works in California can work in a country like Chile? I'm gonna see, Andy, if you could respond to this possibly.
Sure, I can try, and I don't certainly have, data on Sunrun's customers in particular, but I mean, generally with rooftop solar, we have had some research looking at this. I mean, it tends to be relatively higher income people who put on rooftop solar, and primarily single family homes. It's more challenging situation in a multifamily environment. But there has been a change over time, though, especially in California, toward people of kind of less wealthy people putting on solar, and that's especially driven by I don't know how if this is the case in Chile, but the electricity rates, residential electricity rates, are very high. Volumetric rates are very high in California because most costs are rolled up into that rate. There's no fixed monthly charge, very little fixed monthly charge. So the rates end up being very high. So with the net energy metering construct, where you basically get to, the amount of money you're saving is equal to that high rate, it's actually very economic for a wide swath of the population to do. But I'm not familiar. Well, that looks like Chris may be rejoining, but I'm not familiar.
I think Chris has rejoined. I'm going to go back to Chris to Chris in a second, but I want to see if we can go back to this other question that we got. The question is, excluding lithium-ion technologies. And Rodolfo, I'd like for you to respond to this. What are the most commonly commercially viable types of energy storage? So excluding lithium-ion batteries, are there other storage technologies that are commercially viable?
Yes, sure. Lithium-ion, of course, today is the technology of choice because all the electric vehicle industry is driving the demand, and there is plenty of manufacturing facilities for specialized in lithium-ion. And it's important to understand that once you have a manufacturing facility for lithium-ion, it's not easy to change to another technology. But for grid storage, we are analyzing many different other technologies. Some of them are more promising, some of them not. In my opinion, we still need to have some more improvements in the technology of redox flow batteries. But if they manage to improve that technology, then that will be probably a better option than lithium-ion in the long run. But today, those vanadium-based technologies, batteries, are not really working as good. And I also would like to mention about the thermal storage. Thermal storage based on a very simple method, which is to heat up some refractory materials, stones, and then storing that heat and then producing later on steam by using that heat and driving a turbine. Even though the final efficiency of the process is maybe around 30%, but in order to use that technology for storing the excess energy from renewables that we will have certainly in the middle of the day when we have all that much solar that is coming up, then it can be a very good alternative and a complement for storage. And you will have better economies of scale for that technology compared to lithium-ion, because you would have larger facilities with a lower unit cost of storage per kilowatt hour. So I would say that thermal storage could be a good option for integrating large-scale batteries. There is plenty of talk, especially in Europe, about hydrogen storage, which is not really a technology of storage, of storing electricity. It's a technology of converting electricity into a different energy driver. But we have analyzed hydrogen, and the numbers really don't work out in terms of not just the cost of the technology or the cost of the current methods of developing the facilities, but also in terms of the physics, in terms of the thermodynamics that drive the production and the use of hydrogen. So even though it would be very nice to have hydrogen as a source of storage in the future, we believe that it will not be cost efficient in the long run. So I would put my bet first on lithium-ion, of course, but then maybe thermal storage.
Okay, I'm going to come back to hydrogen in a second, but we're getting like 3 or 4 questions, and I want to make sure that we address everybody's questions. So, Chris, I'm going to stack about 3 questions on you now that you're back online.
Great.
One is from Clara from Mexico, and then we have a few previous ones. So, you mentioned, I think in the opening, Clara asked. You mentioned how you are stacking different values of energy storage. In Mexico, when we bring this up to policymakers, they always mention that this is not cost competitive. So the question is, what do you say to this? On top of that, also tell us what kind of customers Sunrun has. What's your typical customer? And then on top of that, and if you don't respond to, if you forget these, I'll remind you. What is, if you could respond to the, what was the other question, second life batteries? Are there studies related to storage from second life batteries? So first one, what do you say to Mexico about stacking different values of storage? Your typical customer, a Sunrun customer, and then second life batteries. Take it away.
Well, thanks. And let me do the typical customer one first, because that's responsive to something that Andy was talking about before. Sunrun does third-party ownership. So we finance and own all of our systems, and we present a low monthly payment to our customers, usually with no upfront cost. So Sunrun's typical customers are middle-class families on their electricity bill. These are not relatively wealthy families because we provide access down the income chain. Sunrun is also the low-income multifamily leader in California through this third-party ownership model. And third-party ownership provides even more benefits with storage than it does with solar, because storage is relatively complex and the market structures to provide grid services are complex, and customers will not go and bid these systems into the wholesale markets, for example, by themselves. So Sunrun acts as the guide between the customer and the markets. To the value stacking question, I think there's one way to look at the cost here, and that's what is the cost of the asset. But I don't think that's the right way to look at it. The other way to look at it is what is the service that needs to be provided, and how do you value that service? So, for example, when we own our assets, we would not be selling the storage itself to provide a service. We're just selling the service. And so if there's an RFP or a market that is scoped to a service, then we can go and compete on cost to provide that service. So, and that's one of the
Chris, we keep losing you.
Services into the same system.
Okay, let me go to another question, just because we keep going back and forth. We're losing you a little bit. I'm gonna come back to value stacking and respond directly from here if we don't get you back, Chris. One question that we had was around hydrogen. Rodolfo, you mentioned that basically hydrogen is not going to be cost effective. I actually was wondering if we could expand on that and also get the view of Andy, and if Chris comes back, and you as well, Rodolfo, because the question that we got was, why not? Why is hydrogen not going to be cost effective if solar prices continue to fall, and hydrogen seems to be, from the various studies, that it could be cost effective if you use solar in places like Australia and Chile. So why, first of all, why do you think that it will not be cost effective? And then also I want to get the opinion of Andy and Chris if possible. So Rodolfo, and then Andy, and then Chris.
Yes, I have a simple answer for that, because we have been analyzing the economics of hydrogen for quite some time. And if you look at the typical studies about hydrogen competitivity, what they tend to tell you is that they will use excess solar or excess wind, so basically at zero price. You have to take into account that you need a lot of electricity to produce 1 unit of hydrogen. So if electricity is cheap or is zero priced, then it could be that you can have a very competitive hydrogen. But again, that only happens from time to time. You don't have excess renewables 24/7. Therefore, if you are going to use only maybe 10% of the time very cheap renewables, then it is not going to be possible for you to amortize a hydrogen producing facility using it only 10% of the time. So both things cannot happen at the same time. If you want to have a sound economics in the hydrogen production, you need to run the facility base load, and you are not going to be able to purchase base load electricity at zero price. So that's why things really don't work out in that sense, because it's important to understand that the final use of energy by hydrogen, they use a huge amount of original renewable energy. It's like a hydrogen vehicles, cars. If you use a battery-based car, then you will use 1 unit of renewable energy. But if you eventually use 1 unit of mobility from a hydrogen car, you would need to use 3 or 4 times as much original renewable energy, electricity, than with the conventional battery-based car. So that's why it's going to be very hard to really have a sound economy on hydrogen use.
Andy, any input from you?
Well, that was say a depressing message to hear about the potential for hydrogen production from electricity, and I don't have anything to push back on that by any means. I just maybe highlight that a lot of the interest in hydrogen is driven by the needs to decarbonize transportation and also buildings and various things that use natural gas. Of course, you can burn hydrogen in a turbine potentially, as well as using it in fuel cell vehicles. But yeah, my sense is it's very much at R&D stage. It's sort of traditional technologies for electrolysis and things like that. Pretty expensive. I mean, ripping apart water into its component parts is not an easy thing to do. It requires a lot of energy. But certainly, if there is R&D potential, I think it should get some attention.
If I can add something regarding the hydrogen issue, is that it is important that we replace the current production of hydrogen that is based on natural gas. We need to replace that with hydrolyzers based on renewable energy. That is very important. So there is certainly a market for hydrogen produced with renewables, because today hydrogen, 95% of the hydrogen used in the world comes from natural gas and is very much carbon intensive. So we probably there is a very interesting number that tells you that all the hydrogen that is being used by industry today amounts to the emissions of Germany. So that's a huge amount of emissions that we need to remove from the atmosphere, and therefore we really need to get the technology of producing hydrogen from renewables going. However, using hydrogen for other things that are not being used today probably will not make a lot of sense, because you will have the alternative, which is using battery-based cars or battery-based storage in the electricity grid.
Okay, we have a few more questions, but we have said that we have 35 minutes, so I'm going to ask one last question, and if you could keep your response to a minute, that would be great. I'm going to ask both you and Andy. I'm not sure if I have Chris on the line. Oh, I have Chris on the line as well. Okay, so we have somebody from Lebanon who's asking, what role can storage play in a country like Lebanon, where they have electric production deficiency? So it's not really about reliability, it's about just needing more electric generation. We can start with Rodolfo, Chris, and Andy can close it out.
Well, energy storage needs to have some initial source of electricity to store the electricity in the first place. So therefore, you need to produce electricity in the first hand. Of course, if you can install solar plus storage can provide you with a controllable source of production that you can use. So that would be the idea. Storage alone, of course, cannot be able to provide any source of power. You need some initial power, and therefore, if you have solar, perfect. If you have wind, but if you don't have an initial prime mover, then the storage cannot do anything.
Chris, are you able to respond? Is communication?
Sure. Let me try here. Yeah, so this is one of the key values that distributed solar and storage can provide. And as Rodolfo said, you need some generation source. But in a grid where you don't have enough generation, and we've done a lot of work on this in Puerto Rico, If you can site distributed solar and storage, primarily on the distribution system on the grid, and drop load off of the grid, then you need less centralized generation. So absolutely, distributed solar and storage can be a critical resource in Lebanon.
Andy, for you to close it out for us.
Sure, I'll just add, I mean, the most important, most significant form of energy storage in the world today is hydroelectric power and pumped storage. So, a place where there are mountains and there is some hydroelectric power, maybe potential to develop more. There is an opportunity to, in the context of those projects, to, where possible, make sure that there's flexibility built into them, as well as, if the geography allows it, some pumped storage capabilities.
So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this. I just want to say that we have participants from UK, from Lebanon, Russia, Chile, Spain, and Argentina, and I'm sure many others that I'm forgetting now. But I want to thank all the participants. We want to thank our guest experts for taking the time. This concludes our webinar for energy storage. We're going to continue to keep an eye on energy storage and continue to put out information for our member countries as the market changes and evolves. So again, thank you so much from the World Energy Council in London. Thank you.